There is one number that tells you everything you need to know about how the 2026 World Cup was built and who it was built for. $11 billion. That is what FIFA expects to earn from this tournament. $11 billion flowing back to an organization based in Switzerland, while the cities that made the tournament possible are left carrying enormous financial burdens. The cities built the fan zones, upgraded the stadiums, expanded infrastructure, handled transportation systems, and paid for security operations. Yet most of the money generated by the World Cup will never stay with them. Alan Rothenberg, the former president of United States Soccer and one of the key figures behind the 1994 World Cup, described the agreement in very simple terms. He called it very, very one-sided. And that description explains almost everything. Today, we are looking at how the 2026 World Cup financial structure actually works, city by city and dollar by dollar, because this may be one of the most important stories surrounding modern football. The structure is straightforward. FIFA keeps virtually all direct tournament revenue. Ticket sales, sponsorships, broadcasting income, hospitality packages, and commercial rights all flow directly to FIFA. Meanwhile, the host cities pay for security operations, transportation systems, fan festivals, emergency services, infrastructure upgrades, and stadium modifications required for football. The cities carry the operational burden, while FIFA collects the profits. That is the agreement signed by the 11 American host cities. And the contrast between FIFA's projected $11 billion in revenue and the hundreds of millions in costs facing local governments is a financial reality underneath this tournament. It was not always structured this way. Rothenberg explained that during the 1994 World Cup, host cities received a share of game day revenues, including concessions and local stadium income. Security and operational costs were also handled differently, allowing cities to actually benefit financially from hosting matches. Hosting the World Cup made economic sense. The 2026 model changed that completely. One city looked at the numbers and decided the deal was too unbalanced to accept. Chicago withdrew from the bidding process. A major American city with football culture, infrastructure, and global recognition reviewed the agreement and concluded that the costs outweighed the benefits. Other cities stayed involved for different reasons. Dallas, Los Angeles, Miami, Atlanta, Seattle, New York, Houston, Boston, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and San Francisco all committed to hosting because of prestige, tourism exposure, and global attention the World Cup brings. And those benefits are real. A World Cup creates economic activity, fills hotels, attracts international visitors, and places cities at the center of global sports attention. But the costs are real too. The United States government awarded approximately $625 million in security funding to the host cities. Even with that support, economists studying major sporting events believe the funding still falls short of what cities actually need. One economist explained it clearly. Host cities are facing massive security expenses, while receiving essentially zero direct revenue from the tournament itself. That means many cities are likely to lose money. And when those costs are not fully covered, taxpayers become responsible for the gap. The people living in these cities, many of whom had no role in negotiating these agreements, may ultimately absorb the financial consequences of hosting the biggest football tournament in history. Texas provides an important example. When Texas invested heavily in hosting the 2017 Super Bowl, officials expected a strong financial return. Later studies showed the state may actually have lost around $14 million on the event. Now Texas is hosting World Cup matches in both Dallas and Houston on a scale far beyond the Super Bowl. The financial risks are significantly larger. The comparison with 1994 is important because it shows how dramatically FIFA's financial model has evolved. Back then, cities received portions of the revenue and had support covering operational costs. Hosting could genuinely benefit local governments. Today, FIFA's revenues have exploded into the billions, while the share flowing back to host cities has effectively disappeared. FIFA is projected to generate $11 billion from the 2026 tournament. The cities providing the stadiums, infrastructure, policing, emergency response systems, transportation networks, and public services receive almost none of that revenue directly. Even ticket sales are fully controlled by FIFA. 100% of ticket revenue goes directly to FIFA. And then there are transportation costs. Before the tournament, New Jersey Trans announced round-trip train tickets from Manhattan to MetLife Stadium would cost around $150 on match days, more than 11 times the normal fare. Fans who had already spent hundreds or even thousands on tickets suddenly faced massive transportation costs simply to reach the stadium. Public backlash forced some adjustments, but the situation illustrated a much larger issue. When cities are burdened with operational costs while lacking tournament revenue, those expenses often get passed directly onto fans. The financial pressure moves downward, from FIFA to cities, from cities to supporters. Canada offers another revealing example. Vancouver expects to spend between $532 and $624 million hosting World Cup matches. Estimated recoveries may offset some of those costs, but officials still expect major financial gaps depending on attendance and operational realities. Even under relatively favorable conditions, cities are struggling to balance the books, which raises a larger question. Is this model sustainable? And more importantly, is it fair? FIFA operates legally as a non-profit organization, yet it is projected to generate $11 billion from a single tournament, while host cities absorb massive financial risks with almost no direct participation in the profits. Economists who specialize in sports finance have repeatedly warned that cities carrying major security and infrastructure costs without revenue sharing are likely to face losses, and that outcome appears increasingly likely across multiple host cities. Alan Rothenberg's criticism matters because he witnessed both systems. He saw a World Cup where cities shared revenues and benefited from hosting. And now he sees a model where FIFA keeps the money while cities keep the bills. Something fundamentally changed between 1994 and 2026. The tournament became bigger, the commercial revenues became larger, and the financial relationship with host cities became dramatically more unequal. That is the real story behind the $11 billion figure, behind the ticket pricing controversies, behind the transportation costs, behind the budget gaps local governments are still trying to solve. The football itself will still be extraordinary. The players will create unforgettable moments. The stadiums will be full. The atmosphere will be incredible. But behind every packed stadium is a city that paid enormous costs to make those matches possible. The stadium upgrades were funded locally. The security operations were funded by governments and taxpayers. The transportation systems were expanded and repriced to absorb operational expenses. And while all of that happened, the overwhelming majority of tournament revenue flowed directly back to FIFA. That is a financial reality of the 2026 World Cup, and it may shape how future tournaments are negotiated long after the final whistle in July. Because once this tournament ends, cities and governments around the world will study the numbers carefully. They will examine whether hosting truly benefited their communities or whether they simply financed a tournament designed primarily to maximize FIFA's profits. That conversation may ultimately become one of the defining legacies of the 2026 World Cup.